Is there anything for which you would give your life? The early followers of Jesus often had to give theirs as martyrs. The word martyr simply means witness. In many places, being a witness for Christ can cost you your life. Jesus knows every time one of his followers makes the supreme sacrifice, and today he commends a church willing to follow him even to death. From the Moody Church in Chicago, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, Erwin Lutzer continues his 8-part series on what Jesus thinks of his church. We're in Revelation chapter 2, learning about the persecuted church at Smyrna and the martyrs who followed Christ to the very end.
The most famous martyr there in Smyrna was a man by the name of Polycarp, who had been friends with John the Apostle. And Polycarp, in the year 156, was brought before the authorities, was asked whether or not he would recant, and he said no. And he said these words that are famous in church history. 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme the king? And that undoubtedly was a slap in the face of Caesar. How can I blaspheme the king who saved me? So they gave him a choice as to how he wanted to die, and he said that the fire would be fine. They hurriedly made a fire, and these are his final words. O God, I thank thee that thou hast thought me worthy to share the cup of Christ among a number of witnesses. And with that, Polycarp died, but he was not the only one who was martyred in Smyrna. Indeed, the devil shall throw some of you into prison. Be faithful unto death. You say, well, that's the historical context of this church. Does this in some sense apply to America today? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. I have in my library a book entitled The Criminalization of Christianity. It's a book that details the desire of some, and particularly our courts, to try to criminalize all public expressions of Christianity in what is called the public square. More than that, as I stand here today, one of our senators has added to a bill to fund the war, has added an amendment regarding hate speech. And this hate speech law basically says that if you are found saying something that could be deemed hateful against any identifiable group, you can be imprisoned, and you can be tried as a criminal, because now speech can be criminalized. That ought to be scary. That is today as I speak. Now, some of you may be hearing this message at a later time, and maybe things will have changed because it is not yet passed, but that's what one of our senators has done. He's added that to an Iraq funding bill, hate speech. Well, what's that all about? I thought I would look at the prototype of this in Canada. This is the Canadian law. It's under advocating genocide. That's an interesting place to put hate speech. And it says, everyone who by communicating statements other than in private conversation willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group is guilty of an indictable offense and is liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or an offense punishable on summary conviction. Now, this, of course, is written because what has been outlawed in Canada is any criticism or disagreement with homosexuality. And I asked a Canadian pastor, as I always do, and did again this summer to a different Canadian pastor, can you still read Romans chapter 1 in a church in Canada? And he says, it depends who is present. If no one is present, if no one reports you, it may be okay. In Germany, by the way, where I was last week, the church basically has simply acquiesced and says we refuse to comment on homosexuality because of the laws that would imprison pastors if they did. Now, you think, for example, of California in the public school system. there is what is known as the School Safety and Violence Prevention Act. Well, everybody wants to prevent violence, right? And the intent of this law, and it quotes it here, the intent of this law states that school personnel are to be trained to detect children who may have the potential of someday displaying discriminatory or prejudicial attitudes, and to instruct teachers to refer these children for re-education or appropriate counseling. Now, it also says, however, that sexual orientation shall not include pedophilia. In other words, you can disagree with pedophilia, but you can't disagree with a homosexual agenda, or else you'll receive appropriate counseling. I just marvel at all this because the folks who make these kinds of laws are absolutely insistent that freedom of speech should no longer be allowable, even in churches. For example, that law in Washington that I told you about, there was another senator who argued that it should include an exemption for churches, but the senator who introduced the legislation absolutely insisted and manipulated so that that would not be included. Now, where does this all lead us? It'll be interesting to find out, because when secularism has its way, it gives broad, expansive First Amendment rights to pornographers, to people who have obscenity. They will invite even the president of a country such as Iraq to their universities, but they will exclude anyone who doesn't fall into line with gender issues. Well, that's America, and I say that without any fear and without any sense of discouragement at all, except to warn you where this nation is going. Now, I told you that the first part of this message was going to be dark and it was going to be discouraging. Now the sun is going to begin to shine and the glory of God is going to captivate us. Aren't you ready for that about now? Isn't that wonderful? Notice what Jesus says to the church at Smyrna. Just notice what he says. First of all, he says, number one,